Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine War news update, first part thereof for the 17th of September 2024, edging closer to my birthday. That's exciting. Just that endless march towards eventual non-existence. That's a cheery thought for the morning. Anyway, the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, or the usual caveats apply. And you can find those in the description to the video below. And of course, the talk of non-existence here, 1,020 personnel lost. In fact, if we look at all the figures across all the categories here, they are low. And we saw that yesterday. 2 consecutive days of low figures is, I think, representative of something. Now, any numbers above 1,000 for personnel lost are phenomenal, right? So that's a massive number there. The Russians are still losing copious numbers of people, but that's the lower end of this high range we've been used to. And also the tanks are well below the daily average at 2 tanks. The troop carrying AFVs are well below the daily average, and they've lost the Russians have lost 6 AFVs. And artillery systems likewise massively low, one of the lowest we've seen for a long time. 6 artillery systems, 1 multiple launch rocket system, 27 vehicles and fuel tanks. That's a very low number. We are used to numbers that are incredibly high. We had a 90, what was it, a 93 recently or something? 27 there today, 1 piece of special equipment. There are some very low numbers here, and that probably suggests, well, I was wondering yesterday where the Russians were in some way culminating. We have heard that there's a decree being put out to increase the size of the Russian MOD by 180,000. So the Russians need troops. They are afraid. Putin is afraid to do a mass general mobilization, but he's supposedly recruiting 30,000 a month anyway, and needing still another 180,000 on top of that. Bearing in mind they took, was it 300,000 in the last proper mobilization drive they did, the official one. Of course, what they've been doing is crypto and klepto mobilization since then. So this under the radar mobilization and stealing people from other countries and so and migrants that don't have the correct paperwork or whatever get taken into the armed forces and sent to the front line. So the Russians, even though they're doing all of those things, they are admitting that they have, I presume they're admitting really that they've lost a massive number of people. And we're going to speak about that in a second because there's been a Wall Street Journal article talking about the comparative losses. Okay, let's though first go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list, and we can see that this is a pretty good day for the Ukrainians. Just in total numbers, the Russians have lost maybe 3 times as many pieces of kit than the Ukrainians, but on the other hand, combat asset losses, Russians only a few more, quite a few taken up by surveillance and comms equipment, and the civilian vehicles, they've lost a pretty sizable number there. Right, let's look at the Ukrainian losses. We start with a command and control vehicle. That's another M577, probably indicates, sorry I haven't checked the source here, but probably indicates that they are on the attack. You usually use your command vehicles when doing sort of maneuver warfare, and that's what they're doing up in the Kursk region, although there are other places along the border as well that it could be, as well as moving back against Vovchansk, as we hear that the aggregates plant that had been the holdout for some Russian soldiers has now fallen to the Ukrainians, so that's good news for the Ukrainians there. Anyway, point is that they're on the attack, so they're going to be losing things like command and control vehicles on the attack in some places. We have a Bren 1 engineering vehicle, a couple of tanks. The ratio of destroyed to damaged is pretty bad for the Ukrainians. They haven't lost a huge amount of kit though, so these stats are somewhat easier to skew. Lower numbers there. APCs, they've lost quite a few senators and strikers and whatnot there, with a damaged Humvee, 3 senators and a striker. 2 MREPs captured, 2 Max Pros captured, that's going to hurt, and 1 abandoned, and then a bunch of civilian vehicles. Okay, so when we go to look at the Russian losses, we start off with a number of surveillance and comms bits of equipment before getting to, and it's the same for the Russians here, most of their equipment is destroyed as opposed to damaged, so that's bad news for both sides in terms of that ratio. We have a couple of tanks, T-80, T-62, destroyed, IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, are the largest category of losses here, mainly BMP 1s and 2s, and then some BTRs and BMD thrown in, a couple of APCs as well, and then your usual long list, almost entirely destroyed. They're just one being damaged, and that's a loaf. The rest of these loafs, Bobics, flatbed trucks, SUVs, vans, larders, motorcycles, etc., etc., have been destroyed. So there you go. That is the list for you today. Bad news, I think, for the Russians on balance, although combat assets are fairly similar. Okay. Now we're going to look at these claims concerning losses. A confidential Ukrainian estimate from earlier this year, so this is already out of date somewhat, put the number of dead Ukrainian troops at 80,000 and the wounded at 400,000, according to people familiar with the matter. So that is about a 5-to-1 WIA to KIA. That is, I guess, fairly decent concerning. Well, we'll look at the Russians in a second. It means that you've got a better chance of surviving if you are wounded. That's essentially the higher the ratio. So if you've got, like, wounded is 10-to-1, so you've got 1 million wounded to 100,000 killed, then that's good. Although it sounds like there's a lot more people involved there, actually the ratio is just much better. It means that you're more likely to be okay. You know, might lose a leg, but you're going to live. Whereas if the ratio of wounded to dead is much closer, then it just indicates that if you get injured, you're likely to die. And that's what we would expect the Russian stats to be, because we understand that they're not so good at collecting up their injured. They claim we never leave anyone behind and then promptly leave everyone behind, that kind of thing. And their staging points and the way that they do, you know, Casevacs, Medivacs and whatnot, it appears to be not as good as the Ukrainians. And so you unnecessarily convert wounded into dead. So then when we look at the stats for the Russian losses, Western intelligence estimates of Russian casualties vary, with some putting the number of dead as high as 200,000 and wounded at around 400,000. So instead of being a 5-to-1 ratio, you've got a 2-to-1 ratio. That is not good. So that indicates that the Ukrainians are doing a better job of looking after their wounded. With over 6 million fleeing Ukraine since the start of the war in February 2022, according to the United Nations, and Russia seizing further land, the total population on Kyiv-controlled territory has now dropped to between 25 and 27 million, according to previously undisclosed Ukrainian government estimates. So this is something that I knew about, Greg Terry knew about. Greg way back was saying the estimates from within Ukraine are that the population dropped from 44 million down to 28 million. And this is something that wasn't really shared very much, but it was a rumor going around that actually the Ukrainians they've lost people in war, but they've lost an awful lot to people fleeing, refugees. A lot of those would be females and children, but you'll get a lot of people doing draft evasion as well, or, you know, suddenly thinking, when my uncle offered me a job in the US, I think I might take that up now, type thing. Okay, 1 million people dead or injured in the war in Ukraine on both sides, according to Wall Street Journal. Russian losses are at about 200,000 killed and 500,000 injured. So again, these estimates vary both in number killed and the number injured. Ukrainian 80,000 to 400,000. So that is another statistic to throw into the mix. There is such a range of stats for those categories. Right. Now, there's been a bit of bad news for certain Russians on the front line here. So just in, Ukrainian Defense Intelligence eliminates Russian military propagandist Alexander Korobov in Russia's Belgorod region. So I think he's called Crab. That was his kind of call sign type thing. Or nickname. I think it's this guy. According to the intelligence, a propagandist skull was fractured I don't know much more detail on this. I've seen this generally repeated in a number of places. I don't know whether that's a kind of assassination attempt on a propagandist, or whether that's as a result of something going off. Now, also, there is another scare quotes war reporter, propagandist, Evgeny Podubny. He's been killed in a Kursk Oblast. So both of these in Russia, reporting on the war from very close to the front, or on the front lines. Podubny, who is previously in an ICU, so he had been injured seriously, now he's died, survived the Ukrainian drone attack and was discharged from hospital in Moscow. Oh, maybe he's been injured and then gone back and now he's died. So I don't know of any more details going on there. And then, if you remember, I told you about the Russians complaining about this chap Goodwin, his nickname Goodwin. He was a drone operator, supposedly a really effective drone operator, but he was put in an assault unit and was killed. Well, it turns out that as PS01 here says, a famous drone operator, Goodwin, died thanks to Dragon drones he burnt alive. So those are those thermite dropping drones, and that appears to be what took this guy out. And there were complaints, of course, that he was being badly utilized. He was a very good drone operator, and because they needed the troops for assaults, they're taking people who are specialists in certain other areas and bringing them in to do these meat style assaults. And unfortunately, unfortunately for the Russians, this guy was killed by a thermite dropping drone going overhead. I presume he was in a dugout or a trench there or something. Goodwin was at the top and burned alive from a thermite drop from a kamikaze VSU. The rest were buried in the ruins of a house from artillery shells. So on and so forth. So a couple of prominent people dying there for the Russians. Right, okay. What else do we have? So I can't remember if I showed you this. I showed you the UGV destroying, driving under. UGV is an unmanned ground vehicle, a drone that travels on the ground. And I showed you the one that went underneath that bridge, that railway bridge, and exploded. We have one that has now been seen to drive up to a tank with an anti-tank mine on it, basically a kamikaze UGV, and then blew up the tank. I think you just about see it there. Drives up to a tank and explodes itself, and that's the end of the tank. So interesting use of a UGV. Okay, Russian mechanized assault in Lyubimivka. I talked about this assault last night on my Frontline update and didn't know the outcome of this assault in Lyubimivka. That's right on the edge of the western. I mean, it's somewhat further to the east than the Ukrainians were. They've been pushed back on the western side of the salient, although there are claims today that they've encircled some people vaguely near around that area. But they were pushed back, and now they're fighting around Lyubimivka. The Russians sent a big old assault at Lyubimivka, mechanized assault. During the attack, Russians shelled civilian buildings. A column of 6 units of armored vehicles were destroyed by artillery of the 103rd Assault Brigade. So it looks like, well, I don't know if it's fully repelled, but the Russians lost a number of vehicles in that exchange. And then we have this interesting one. We've seen the Ukrainians get involved. Well, previously, Sudan several times. We've seen them being involved in Mali, taking out Wagner forces in both places. And we've also seen them target a place in Syria before, I believe. And now we're hearing that Ukraine's intel, the GUR or HUR, depending on how you transcribe it, claims that it destroyed a Russian base in Syria. They say it happened yesterday in Aleppo and was targeted because it's where drones were manufactured and tested. So again, this is helping the war effort in general in terms of, well, these drones are going to be used at the testbed here is Syria, and they're going to be brought to bear against Ukrainians in Ukraine. Then we need to destroy that, even though it's in another country. Or, like, you destroy stuff that's out there, they can't have their influence operations successful out there, or they have to draw resources from elsewhere in order to help in Syria. So those resources are getting drawn from I don't know, either Ukraine or somewhere else, which means the influence operations somewhere else fail. And all of that means that Russia loses influence and has less ability to successfully prosecute the war in Ukraine. So all these things are connected. So you might wonder, what the heck are the Ukrainians doing out there? I think this is all very sensible. Go and take out Wagner. They took out all those troops in Mali. And we've now heard that troops from that neck of the woods have been drawn back to fight in Kursk, to defend Kursk. Well, actually, now they've got fewer troops to draw back from because Ukraine supported a Tuareg attack on those Wagner troops, and 85 of them died. And so this is, I think, still really useful, really important for the Ukrainians to continue to do these things. Interesting that a drone base has been taken out. Now, this is a helicopter crash. It might have nothing to do with the war. It might be tangentially connected to the war. It could even be some kind of oligarch hit job. So Robinson R-66 helicopter carrying the director of a gold mining company has crashed in Russia. There are so many helicopter crashes that these are beyond statistically anomalous. There has to be a trend. There has to be something going on in Russia that there are so many helicopter crashes. We have seen a whole bunch of helicopter crashes and plane crashes and light plane crashes, all sorts. So the whole shebang. Is this a case of maintenance? Is this a case of sabotage? Is this a case of oligarch hit job because money's tight, things are somehow financially connected to the war, etc., etc. What is going on here? I'm sure that there is something happening, that these aren't just random helicopter crashes. We are seeing too many. Just in the last few weeks, some significant crashes. We had sort of two in just a few days. Another one for a country the size of Russia, as in population wise. I'm sure that there are more helicopters than helicopter crashes than there normally would be. Anyway, moving on. Distant strikes, and yet again the Russians throwing a huge wave. I say huge, I mean it's not the biggest, but it's significant. If they're doing this every night at the moment, they are producing a lot of drones. This has to be a real issue for the Ukrainians, as in one of their top targets would be hitting that drone manufacturing plant, which they tried to hit previously with one of their light aircraft drones. And I don't think they stopped the manufacturing there. It kind of fell near some accommodation blocks in the area. I think there were two drones here. Anyway, here we've got another night of a Shahed attack where 51 were launched into Ukraine. 34 were shot down. You might think, 34 out of 51, that's not enough. But actually, because they're doing such a good job on electronic warfare and whatnot and spoofing, that, okay, you got 34 shot down, 2 returned to Russia, so that's 36. 12 were lost in Ukrainian territory, so that's 48, likely due to electronic warfare measures. So that leaves 3 out of 51 left to potentially hit their target. So that's a really good interception rate, really good loss rate for the Ukrainians taking out those Russian drones. However, they would rather not have to do that, and they'd rather destroy those drones, I'm sure, in situ in their manufacturing facility. So on this idea that the Russians are just firing stupendous amounts of drones into Ukraine on a nightly basis at the moment, Zelensky said in the first half of September alone, so with the 17th of September, in the first half of September, the Russians used over 640 Shahed drones against Ukrainian cities and villages. That's an insane number of drones. Fortunately, most of them were shot down by the Ukrainians. We are continuously working to make Ukraine's air shields more effective, strengthening our air force, mobile air fire groups, and all air defense units, and of course, like electronic warfare and whatnot. Lots of people involved in the destruction, the interception of these from, older, maybe Tunguska type things, ZSU 23, these older cannons on the back of some kind of vehicle. Like there you can see this truck that's a flatbed truck with ZSU 23 or something like that on the back, firing up at a drone. You have newer bits of kit. I saw a picture of a video today of a UK provided Supercat, that was this adapted one. I think, what does it fire? Does that fire what the NASAMS fires? Does that fire AIM? I forget which missiles, AMRAAMs. Anyway, you got a quite a rare Super Cat. You've got the UK provided Stormers that have short range air defense missiles on board. Then you've got heavy machine guns like this whacked on the back of, and small arms fire whacked on the back of trucks. So you got your mobile fire units here. You got similar. You got a truck with equipment on the back, and then you've got your Gepards, which have the added radar systems. You got these listening posts for the audio, for the sound of the drones, to try and locate them. There's a whole network of audio monitoring sites. You move on to your NASAMS and Hawks and all these, the whole range of air defense missiles that they use, right up to Patriots. And then of course you've got your drone on drones. I saw a Lancet getting taken out by an FPV drone just now. That was quite impressive. So you got drone on drone attacks, and then you've got I don't know that drones take out things like Shahed drones, I have to say, but nonetheless, you also have planes doing a job of air defense, and helicopters we've seen as well. So just the whole kit and caboodle. If you think where the Ukrainians were when the Russians first started bringing these Shaheds to bear against the Ukrainians, and how much of an issue it was, and the interception rate was way down. And we look at where they're at now, that's absolutely incredible. They've done such a good job of adapting. Now, Tim White said, as I reported in thread last night, Sumy was being ferociously attacked by Russia's drones and aerial bombs. Places like Konotop, Okhtir, and Sumy city itself have been affected. There was widespread power cuts, no water at all in Sumy. In Baranivka, a house was destroyed. So Sumy seems to be getting a hard time. Now, Sumy is beneath the Kursk Oblast, and that's where they're attacking up into Kursk from, and other areas on the border possibly as well. And that is receiving quite a bit of attention from the Russians, as you can imagine, as they try and stop the Ukrainians being able to stage and supply those forces acting across the border into Kursk. Now, the big news from last night was that Engels Air Base in Saratov was struck by something. Still not exactly sure what happened there. Explosions can be seen and heard, but on videos posted online by locals at or near the airfield, which is home to Russia's Tu-95 bombers. It's incredibly important, Saratov. It's where those bombers take off from to release the cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and so on and so forth that batter Ukraine. So while there are myriad videos of explosions at Engels and Saratov, we still have no idea if it's a successful attack or not. In all likelihood, nor will we until satellite photos are released. It's 500 miles, 800 kilometers from the border in Sumy region to the airbase. It is reachable by quite a few bits of Ukrainian ordnance. They have, remember, missiles that supposedly can fire up to 1,000 kilometers. They also have drones that can do twice that. So yeah, fire observed in the distance there at Engels. And now we have firms data to confirm there are some pretty substantial fires there. That could well be a case of taking out either air defense or airport infrastructure, as opposed to any planes that are sitting on a runway. It could be that those areas there are hangars or something. I have no idea, but certainly some heat signatures coming from Saratov, from Engels Air Base there, and this is the satellite imagery. So Engels 2 Air Base, let's see what tomorrow brings. But Sentinel-2 from September the 15th, so this is 2 days ago, gives a clue as to what was there. So 2 days ago, there's a Tu-22, Tu-95, T-160, and transport plane, an AN-12. So there you go. There are, and it looks like this is the area that there was some explosion. So you've got T-160 covered in tires, and there was some explosions at this end of the airport. So it could be that another plane was hit, but it doesn't look like from the firm's data any of the planes along here were hit, and that's where your Tu-95s are. So quite a few of them there, and some Tu-22s as well. So shame that they might not have been hit but who knows? Maybe they'd been moved and they were down the other end. Anyway, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Now I'm going to do a few. I've made a few claims. I think yesterday, my frontline update was it that the Ukrainians are using more guided glide bombs, I think, than we have previously seen. There are these GBU. Let's go and just explain to you what they are. So we know that the Ukrainians have been using things like the AASM Hammer, the French provided guided glide bomb. I think they get 50 of those a month was the original declaration from the French, up to 600 over the year, but I think they might have been trying to up that. The GBU-39 small diameter bomb is a 250-pound, 110-kilogram precision-guided glide bomb that is intended to allow aircraft to carry a greater number of smaller, more accurate bombs. Okay, so this is what they appear to have quite a few of from the Americans. Let's see if it mentions Ukraine. Yeah, Ukrainian Air Force. It doesn't current operators. I don't think it says anything about them. Operational history. It mentions other places, not Ukraine, actually, interestingly. But anyway, they appear to be using these at the moment quite successfully. They get mentioned a fair amount. Now, that's not to say that the Russians aren't themselves using huge amounts of guided glide bombs, and they are, of course they are. But it's good to see that the Ukrainians are using them more and more and using them successfully. So here we have an airstrike carried out on a Russian field headquarters, which is a fairly significant setup there. And you then come over to... Of course you do. I turned the music off because I expanded it. It turns it back on because that's really what I want, isn't it? Anyway, here we have... I wonder if this is Vesoloye in the Kursk region. I recognise that as looking like the stuff that's northeast of Vesoloye. So this could be Vesoloye, one of those three places that they have either taken or they're partially taken or they're in... Anyway, Russians on the receiving end of a big old explosion there. That is a sizable... That is a pretty sizable explosion. I don't know how many bombs that is, but that's what it did look like, and that's it after it's been hit. And then you can see there it's fairly well destroyed. Depending on what was in there, I don't know. Command and control, depot, cache, I don't know, but that's been well and truly blown up. And here's another one, supposedly a JDAM ER, so similar munition here. These were initially given and then had a lot of electronic warfare, lack of success due to electronic warfare, but I think there was also the complaint they weren't, with some of the weapons, like the ones fired from the ground launchers, having the Boeing GLSDB, ground launch small diameter bombs, just like those bombs we just seen, the version that is sent off from the ground, they were getting interfered with electronic warfare and they didn't have much success. But one of the complaints was also you're not using them properly. Like, you need to do work to make sure that that's the right place to use them and do some preparatory work and then use them. Can't just expect to use them and then be successful straight away. Anyway, I digress. Here's another building that's been absolutely mullered, and actually, if you watch this footage, it's quite impressive in a destructive kind of way. The whole building just evaporates, essentially. It's just completely turned to dust. And you're thinking, and then there's another strike after that. There's a couple in there. So that's in Vesele. I don't know which Vesele. There's a Vesele in north of Bakhmut area. Anyway, it's just another example of guided glide bombs used by the Ukrainians, and they seem to be having success. Now, when we talked about, and I said this yesterday, the Poltava incident where the Russians hit with a couple of Iskanders the comms training establishment, and there were 50 dead. up to 300 wounded as well. Really terrible. But we must remember as well, I tried to say that at the time, A, that's what you're going to expect in war, and B, that kind of thing is also happening just on the front lines, though, all the time. Both sides are hammering each other, and you'll be getting some pretty significant loss of life. That's how you get to claims of 1,000 people dying a day, because those kind of strikes are happening on a routine basis. Anyway, add to those uses of guided glide bombs. You've also got HIMARS being used really effectively. So tungsten airburst over Russian soldiers in the Horlivka area. The forests around the city hold a massive amount of Russian forces supporting the Pokrovsk effort. I'm very glad to see a video from this area. So these are HIMARS striking Russian troops somewhere on the Eastern Front. And those kind of airbursts where they explode above and then just rain down tungsten fragments. You've got, I won't show you this, but there's quite a few dead bodies and destroyed equipment here as it's hit in a forest. And this is, a good use of HIMARS. Is being used effectively as artillery, but can have a really devastating effect if you've got quite a few personnel around the area, because those tungsten fragments are flying everywhere. And yes, it will render equipment inoperable, but any human being out there is going to be in a lot of trouble. And then there's another HIMARS strike targeted a Russian military training ground in Donetsk Oblast, reportedly hitting the center of the Russian gathering. The attack reportedly resulted in approximately 50 Russian casualties. Now remember, casualties is dead and wounded. In this video, I can't show it to you, but there are quite a few dead Russians in this. And so it's another example of how, yes, we can worry about, and as we should, you want to mitigate against strikes against training centers. People knew that was there. Should there have been training there? Should there have been, what do you do about that, etc., etc.? And it was terrible. But the context is that this kind of stuff is happening on the front lines every day. And here, just a couple of examples of HIMARS doing just an absolute ton of damage, as well as those guided glide bombs. Dead Russian soldiers at training ground filmed after a reported HIMARS strike. That's in south of Donetsk city in the Donetsk Oblast, and it's got a geolocation there. So yeah, good news for the Ukrainians that they are having some success in these strikes. But remember, of course, the Russians will be doing similarly. Here's a Russian one in Zvanivka, south of Seversk, where they are hitting with their own guided glide bombs, doing some serious damage to some target there. Not sure what it is, but they, of course, are using their guided glide bombs at 10 a penny. I wonder if there's been a reduction in their usage, whether the movement of planes due to the worry about ATACMS striking air bases had an effect. I wonder whether air defences or the loss of planes recently has had an effect. I don't know. I don't know the statistics, but I would hope it would be nice if there was a dwindling number of those being used, but the Russians seem to be able to produce them quite freely. Okay, we're moving on to other bits and pieces, and we're going to start with a war crime. It appears that, or an apparent war crime. I can't show you this. This is doing the rounds. There's quite a few images of this, and they're all pretty horrific. So the Russians executed a Ukrainian soldier with a sword. You can see the hilt of the sword here, and it is a kind of fantasy replica sword. It's a big old proper sword, but one of these ones, made kind of Lord of the Rings-esque or whatever. And in order to have stuck a sword through the chest of a Russian, you are not having a sword fight in this urban area. This is a prisoner of war, where you've just decided to kill him with a sword. Yet another war crime by the terrorist regime's army amid its war to exterminate Ukraine, says Ilya Ponomarenko. Now confirmed by Ukraine's ombudsman, Dmytro Lubinets. So they have registered this as a war crime. Ukraine appeals to the UN and the Red Cross over apparent execution of a POW with a sword. Ukraine's ombudsman Dmytro Lubinets said on September the 17th that he had appealed to the International Committee of the Red Cross and the United Nations in response to a photo that allegedly shows the execution of Ukrainian prisoner of war by Russia. It's horrific. The pictures are not nice. Russia. Okay, Tim White said, not a great deal of news around, but in brief, Deep State Maps founder confirms that thousands of Russians are surrounded in Kursk. So there's this claim that and this is from Deep State, this area of Crimea, not the Crimea down on the eastern front line by the Serebryantski forest, but this is a Crimea in the middle of the Kursk Oblast towards the north, not the Kursk Oblast, the Kursk salient towards the northwest of the sector. It could be where Ukrainians have countered the counterattack. I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to check my map to see exactly where that is. But some Russian military are surrounded in the Kursk region, but it's too early to draw conclusions, says Deep State. Quote, and the last update in the Kursk region, everyone could see such a very interesting surrounded grey zone. That's how it is. That is, the Russians are surrounded. They are trying to break through certain routes. They're in there in order to provide reinforcements. Sorry, our military is fighting with them. The picture there is very interesting, but again, it's difficult and premature to draw any conclusions. But it could be that lots of Russian soldiers are captured there. Military leads, I can't quite make sense of Tim's claim here. It seems that he's saying that Ukrainian military leaders are saying up to 40% of Russians on the front line are killed due to drones, or killed and injured, I don't know, which helps replace artillery. So the drones, I'd heard higher numbers previously. So the drones, the point being that drones really are replacing artillery as one of the main ways that soldiers are killed or wounded on the front line. At the beginning of the war, what's the stat? Was it 88% of all casualties were from artillery? It was an absolutely phenomenal statistic. But since the Ukrainians were met with a shell shortage and you had the 7 months of impasse in Congress, they had to find a way to do artillery, without ammunition. So you had the development of these drones that have become more and more important and prevalent, and to the point where they are taking up 40% of Russian frontline casualties, as according to one of Tim's sources there. Okay. Now, in that Kursk region, the Ukrainians have expanded the bridgehead in the Glushkovsky district. So you've got the same river. So this is the east. This could be where those troops are. It looks like the troops are surrounded further up here, though. Anyway, whatever. You've got the border here. You've got the same river. And then you've got these couple of areas where the Ukrainians are attacking across the border to try and attack into the Russian rear here, causing them to, have a lot to contend with. But it's interesting, this map has the grey zone, or possibly Ukrainian control zone, actually, not grey zone, all the way along the border, connected to the Ukrainian Kursk salient over here. So it's a much more charitable interpretation of how much territory the Ukrainians control here. I just thought that was interesting. I don't know, though. I have no idea about the provenance of this map and its accuracy, but there is a claim that the Ukrainians are expanding their bridgehead in the Glushkovsky district, and it could indicate that the Russians might well need more troops. I played you some footage of George Barros saying that really the Russians need maybe 150,000 troops up there to completely clear the Ukrainians out of Kursk. They have, General Sursky said 30,000. George Barros reckoned they had probably half of the 50,000 number he was talking about at another point. So he was implying that they probably got about 25,000. You've got Zelensky saying they want 60 to 70,000, the Russians there. Can't quite work out whether he meant they've got them or that they want them. But you've got these differing numbers. All of those numbers are not what George Barros says, which is 150,000 that are needed to clear out the Ukrainians. And if the Ukrainians are making further gains along the border, then you might see more troops having to be pulled out of the other frontline areas. And it then makes a little bit of sense that Putin has now asked for another 180,000 people to be drawn up into the Russian armed forces. So that is possibly an indication that Russia are a little bit desperate at the moment. Now, this is painting this all in rather good news to the Ukrainians, but it could be. I don't know. We'll see. There could be, over exaggeration from both sides or whatever. But my suggestion is that the Russians might be in a little bit of trouble, because then you add it together with this. So if you watch my last night's Frontline update, I talked about how there are two areas that have been asked for evacuation. One of them is the Rilsk district, which is, so you've got the Kursk salient here. You've got a couple of areas here, there and there, where the Ukrainians are over the border, and that last map said actually all of that's connected. You've actually got another area over here by Tekhino, where the Ukrainians are across the border. And there were claims, interestingly, and I haven't really heard much about this, but there were claims about a week or so ago that the Ukrainians were, thinking about Kumatovka up here, and they were fighting up here, though I've heard nothing about that since. But then we heard last night that two regions have been asked to be evacuated by the Russians. Now, why would they do these regions over here? I kind of didn't give it enough thought last night. One of the best, I think, explanations of why they are evacuating these regions, and that's huge. If they fully evacuate those regions, that's huge. But it means that they are expecting there to be a lot of fighting there. They're not evacuating over here by Kursk or Lugov or down here. They're evacuating up here. And I think they've got intelligence that so there's been this talk about the Ukrainians still do have reserve forces that they are not committing either to Pokrovsk or to the Kursk region. So what is going on with these missing reserve forces? Now, I don't know if they definitely have them. You've got Zelensky saying yesterday that he's got only 4 out of these new 14 brigades are equipped. So he's complaining that to the West that he needs more equipment because these brigades are fundamentally unequipped or ill-equipped. But at the same time, you've got possibly a bunch of troops filtering through training, coming on through, and there are claims that actually a few months away you're going to start getting some more Ukrainian troops coming online with, to some fairly decent numbers. So that could be what's going on. And you've got maybe already trained up and possibly or possibly not equipped troops. Could it be that the Russians have intel that the Ukrainians are going to attack across the border up here? That's what would make sense of evacuating here. And it also makes sense that you might have had deep reconnaissance groups fighting in the Kumatovka. So the idea is that acting governor of Kursk region in Russia, Alexei Smirnov, announced a mandatory evacuation of civilians from a 15-kilometer zone in yellow of Kumatovka and Rilsk districts, areas in green, of the western Kursk region. So the Kumatovka is yellow and this is the Rilsk district. That is a huge area of land, and you wouldn't do that just for shits and giggles, right? That is something you do because you are worried about those people being involved in war. Now, it's unlikely that Ukrainians are going to burst out from the Kursk salient they already have. That is an area where they've been slowed down by Russian defences. So it's more likely you're going to see an attack across the border where that would make sense anyway. I said that Ukrainians should be playing border whack-a-mole and they should be attacking across the border in as many places as they can, and that would cause the Russians to properly panic and bring forces back from the front line, because this is where the defences are the weakest. You don't attack on the front line, you will get attrited. Mines, fortifications, aerial bombardments, artillery, etc., etc. You attack across the border into Bryansk, into Belgorod, into Kursk. That's what they've done already, had great success. Do it again and again. We're seeing evacuations. Anyway, I just thought, sorry to spend so much time on that, but it could be significant or it could be nothing. Pinch of salt and all that. Now, NOAA report says of the Kursk area, Russians acknowledge that their attempt to retake Ukrainian positions is going more slowly than expected, and the focus is more on preventing further Ukrainian expansion on other sectors of the front in Kursk. So the argument here is that the Russians are playing containment. They're not playing retake. Interesting. Again, we'll have to wait and see. what else? So moving further along to Vovchansk, if you remember, the aggregates factory or the aggregates plant was where the Russians were holding out, surrounded supposedly for a long time. Now the Russians have been shelling that. It is now accepted that the Ukrainians have retaken that. That the Russians are no longer there. Russian forces shelling the aggregate plant in Vovchansk. It's believed that the Russian battalion was surrounded in there for most of the summer, resupplied by drones. If the Russians are shelling the plant, they must think no living Russians are still there. And in fact, I think that has now been accepted by Andrew Perpetua. By the way, I forgot to say, I posted a main map update last night and another this morning. Ukraine kicked Russia out of the southern part of Vovchansk. So that's really good news. However, bad news for the Ukrainians is in Chasiv Yar. So you've got the canal coming down here. You've got apparently the Russians getting to a place called Stupochki and putting some flags up there. We'll have a look at that in my next mapping update. And we had Surat Maps having all of this area by Klishchivka under Russian control up to the canal. Andrew has that as grey zone, but it's likely that the Ukrainians have ceded most, if not all, of that territory, and the Russians have pushed back there. So worrying for the Ukrainians, but not an immediate threat to Chasiv Yar itself, but it doesn't help, right? That was a kind of buffer zone. Now, last thing I'll say, I love these little stories about how people are trying to change people's minds at the places that they work concerning, disinformation on Russia, putting people straight. If you have little anecdotes of this, please put them in threads. I do try and read as much as I possibly can. This is Hugo Kappas saying, JP, I was on the set the other day, so obviously an actor or something, and there was a lot of waiting around. I was talking to one of the other extras, so I presume an extra, about Ukraine and things, and was giving some good facts, which he was absorbing. So A, that's really good. So it's not someone you're arguing with, but you're just educating them so they can then take that knowledge to someone else. You spread it like a positive contagion. That's an oxymoron, but you want to be spreading positive, fact-based narratives about what is going on in Ukraine and why it's happening. But the lady across from us was listening intently and came out after a bit to say she is Ukrainian and thanked me for following what was going on so closely. We then had an amazing chat and she gave me a hug. Then the ADs came and we went, so that's assistant directors, I think, came and we went to set. We have to keep up the work of watching and understanding what is going on in Ukraine and around the world. So many don't get it, but the Ukrainians appreciate it massively. Awesome. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for letting me know that you have done that. Here we have another one from Mr. Pielskaya. I butchered your name there, mate. I presume that's Mr. Polish. I don't know. I've been your avid follower for a while now, one and a half years, I reckon. Thank you. And interact here regularly. I know. I've had these encounters you mentioned a lot too. First that comes to mind is my brother-in-law, who is a smart lad, successful and fairly liberal. We had a discussion a year ago where he challenged me while I was watching one of your videos. He had a football acquaintance from Donbass who had told him it's all fine, and to locals it doesn't matter which flag they're under. So I went on and talked about butcher, kindergarten teachers executed, burned libraries and looted museums. An acquaintance under Russian occupation is an anecdote at best, but insider like this might have a big impact on an individual. But information like that, yeah. He was also against US aid to Ukraine because of the threat of China, and I outlined to him what the US aid consists of and how it actually makes the US military stronger. Boom! I have multiple and also how China are looking to learn from Ukraine, and Ukraine acts as a deterrence to China. I have multiple sources and I follow things from other media too, but your channel is by far the most followed source of information, and I really like most of your topics. So thank you. You matter and you're a good human being. Thank you very much there, Mr. Polskaya. That is exactly the sort of stuff I like to hear. Not the stuff making me feel better about myself, but the taking knowledge and convincing people of the correct understanding of reality, and that can hopefully pass it forward. And talking about disinformation, it's worth noting that I don't even remember that meme. Elon Musk shared this one with a Zelensky looking like that and saying, well, it's been 5 minutes and you haven't asked for $1 billion in aid. Right, and this meme did the rounds, and it was what Elon Musk shared. Remember this meme that Elon Musk posted? Apparently, it was created by someone named Sophia, who worked for a Russian government agency sanctioned by the US and aimed at spreading propaganda in the West. Somebody here has got access to whatever organization that is, has got access to a massive data leak and uncovered some really interesting details. There's going to be some fascinating stuff in the Geopolitics video with regard to some leaks on information and whatnot. But this is, really typical. But isn't it sad how a man with that many hundreds of millions of followers is just freely able to amplify direct Russian propaganda to those people? He is a useful idiot for Russia. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.